more flowy conversation, just knowing
Wonderful. Okay.
Eric, honey?
Yes, I know.
He's just plugging in the computer. Stand by. They're about to go live.
Okay.
We are live.
Yeah. Come on, Dr. Pearl.
Okay, everybody. Hello and welcome. My audience, Dr. Pearl and Jillian Fleer's audience, and welcome to our second installment of the free teleseminar webinar series we have called Superhuman Healing. And I'm really excited to be with both Eric and Jillian because they are doing some amazing stuff. And if you don't know about Eric Pearl, Eric was minding his own business, being a chiropractor with a very successful practice in California, when he started noticing that his patients were getting better before he started touching them. And this freaked him out so much, and so many other effects that he was having on lights and on all kinds of things really astounded him so much that he went on a bit of a quest to try to find out what was going on. And in the process, discovered an entirely new way of healing, a new way of accessing what basically he refers to as quantum frequencies and special frequencies. He's also joined by his chief operations officer, the head of development, Jillian Fleer, who has an amazing background in both business and healing. So she's a double threat. And the two of them are really bringing Reconnective Healing to the world in so many different regards. And the other thing to say about Eric and Jillian is that we've been great friends for a long time, and we have great regard for each other and the work that each of us does and the work that we bring to the planet. So for people who don't know much about me, I'm an internationally best-selling author. I've written 7 books. The last 4 have been in this area. I also trespassed into strange area. I have a background as an investigative reporter, but I started coming upon amazing studies of things like spiritual healing. And I kept thinking, if you can have a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the universe works. So that set me on a quest to find out why. And I wrote a book called The Field, which is essentially a compilation and a synthesis of all of the frontier science that collectively demonstrates that we are on the brink of a completely new understanding of how we work and how the world works. And I followed that up with the Intention Experiment, which was not only a book about the power of intention and the science of intention, but an invitation to be part of my worldwide intention experiments. We just completed one on Monday, sending intention to Yemen. We had Arabs, Israelis, and Americans, as well as people around the world participating. And believe it or not, Hudaydah, which was the focus of our intention, which is the port where the most bombing was going on, they called a ceasefire the very day of our experiment. So did we do this? I don't know. But anyway, so I've also written The Bond, which is about how to live this, and my latest book, The Power of 8, which is the power of intention in small groups. So welcome, Dr. Pearl, Jillian Fleer, and I want to talk a little bit this session about things that happen in healing that are superhuman in that they operate beyond time and space. Now, I know that you have an idea. A lot of people talk about mind awareness, but you have a different kind of awareness that you make use of in Reconnective Healing. Do you want to talk to that a bit?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having us. This is so fun to do this together again. Reconnective healing is an interesting approach from the standpoint that often we are really standing in this sort of role or position as 3 things. I'm going to say inspiration, a catalyst, an observer, and a witness. And the interesting part about that is that it presents this kind of, we're not exactly sure how it's all happening, sensibility. And the biggest component, I would say, is that when we engage what we'll now call the intelligence that is the conduit of sort to the reconnective healing frequencies. And those frequencies of energy, light, and information, we often refer to as the language. So this language has a particular engagement. It reaches to us. So right off the bat, we are sort of sitting in this, I'm going to say, exclusive position as a receiver. We receive these frequencies or the language, and like any new language, there's a bit of a getting to know you. And that's where we found that we aren't sitting in thinking awareness or mind awareness. We seem to be the best vessel for receiving this intelligence or the language when we are actually in what I'm going to just call awareness. I love Rupert Spira because he talks a little bit about that state, and the question at hand is, it's where we exist, whatever that means. It's where we really exist. It's that place we know we're in, because if you were to ask yourself the question, how do you walk towards yourself? Mm-hmm. It would be a bit of a conundrum of an answer. So that's when we had to go sort of on the journey, especially for our students, because they are very bright-minded. We are living in this beautiful era where we now really know our thoughts are not our reality all the time, right? We can't always believe what we think. I love when you and Greg and Joe talk from that perspective. And so for our students, they are learning this in-between space, which is when this intelligence or these frequencies reach to them, they can't think their way there. Mm-hmm. They have to sort of find both their mindfulness, which is their awareness in the thinking, and then they have to wait and receive like a Bluetooth, almost like a receiver exclusive, where they're pairable with things, but they are not directing anything.
Sometimes we refer to the state as mindlessness, sort of as a play on it, because you leave the consciousness of thinking and you end up in an awareness that really is such a surprise, in a sense, that it causes you to take stock of where you are and what's going on from a different level of attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I find that so interesting, because one of the things that was fascinating to me about Power of 8 groups, and I should tell your audience anyway, and anyone who's listening who has never heard of my work before, that in the course of doing these giant intention experiments, looking at what happens if we all direct the same thought at the same target at the same time, which is what we were doing for Yemen the other day, and what I've done 34 times now with different experiments working with scientists around the world. So I've wanted to ground everything I do in science, because there's not a whole lot of woo-woo about me. I mean, I started the whole thing with the intention experiment, not actually believing it was going to work, and not believing a lot of the facile stuff about the power of intention. I want, I think, I get. I thought it's a lot more complex than that. And in a way it is, and in a way it's simpler than that. But when I started playing around with putting people into groups of 8 and just seeing what would happen if people were intending in a small group, or someone in the group with some sort of challenge, a health challenge or whatever, one thing that I wanted to do was to see what was going on, because we were experiencing, and I didn't expect this, and it kind of blew my mind, because, as I say, I'm a journalist, not a healer. But what blew my mind is that people were healing all kinds of intractable illnesses in an instant, in a 10-minute window. And I kept trying to figure out what's going on. And it took me 10 years really to get the courage to write The Power of Eight, because I didn't actually believe what I was witnessing thousands and thousands of times. But when I finally had a scientific study done of the Power of Eight groups, where we put an EEG cap on one member of each group, and we ran it 7 times with 7 groups of student volunteers at Life University, the world's largest chiropractic university. What we discovered was really interesting and kind of speaks to what you've talked about. What we found was that as soon as people got into these groups, because we were measuring the senders, not the receivers, parts of the brain, particularly the parietal lobes, which sit right back here, and they govern our sense of separateness. They tell us how to navigate through space. What is me? What's not me? They were dialed way down, almost immediately. So were the parts of the brain, the right frontal lobes, that are involved with worry, doubt, negativity. So all of this separate awareness was turned way down. The temporal lobes too. So these were essentially people in a state of ecstatic oneness. They'd lost their individuality and they'd felt a palpable sense of oneness. And that's what they described over and over again. You know, I felt amazing electricity. I was crying uncontrollably. I felt like I was part of a higher network. These are the kinds of things people have reported thousands of times in surveys of mine. So I think one of the amazing things about superhuman healing of any kind is that we step out of that little self into a bigger sense of oneness, into a bigger self, into that self of all that is. And when we're there, we suddenly discover that so many more things are possible.
And these are some of the things that Gary Schwartz was looking at actually at the University of Arizona with us with Reconnective Healing back even as early as the late 1990s, remember those? Finding that worry and distraction reduced itself dramatically as you went into a more selfless space. And with the Reconnective Healing frequencies, they found that shall we say, the practitioner or the facilitator's heart wave would show up measurably, visibly in the brainwave of the person receiving the healing.
So this part of the field, you know, we always say, when Eric kind of became, let's say, that first receiver of this intelligence, you know, this portal opened in a tangible, really practical way. Maybe not so much for his life at that moment, but really for so many. We wonder at that moment, how did the field change with the onset of, you know, again, this energy plus light and information sort of working in this trilogy almost. And I think we are such unique beings, this concept of, you know, sort of time space. We have built our awareness of ourselves kind of to make sure that daily life makes sense in that. But we are really, as you're bringing to light here, this time-space concept is the illusion of the mind to be able to create that which it wants to see or understand. And it's very powerful. The powerful part is maybe this multidimensional concept. We've been talking about multidimensionality for so long. Is really wrapped up in what you're bringing up here, which is insta-healing.
Well, I think you're so right about this, Jillian, because, you know, we have an experience of life as one thing, you know, and partly we have that experience because of science. You know, science tells us who we are and how we're supposed to live. That's our Bible of the 21st century. And the current science is more than 300 years old. You know, it's a view of us as separate beings operating according to fixed laws in time and space. You know, we're very well-behaved separate objects, except that the new evidence of the field, in the field, that we are all part of this giant quantum energy field, that we are always in this field, is completely breaking apart that worldview. And we're also realizing that, you know, time and space are an illusion. Now, when I started researching the field and started finding some amazing studies, and I'll talk about them in a minute, I remember going to the late Robert John, who was the Dean of Engineering at Princeton, and saying, Bob, how does this all work? I don't understand this. And he said, yeah, it's simple, Lynn. Take time out of it, and it all makes sense. And that to me was like a perfect, that was like a koan. That was like, wow, of course. We are, you know, we're timeless and spaceless. And we're, you know, time is one great big smeared out now. And space is one great big smeared out here. So when we start looking at the science of it, I mean, there are amazing studies showing that, well, even my own intention experiments, I mean, a whole series that I did with the University of Arizona was having groups around the world at different times sending intention to one of 4 sets of seeds. The scientists didn't know which seeds we sent intention to. We selected them in the group, and the first time I did it, I was in Sydney, Australia. The seeds are sitting there in Tucson, Arizona. We chose one set of seeds from the 4 photographs they sent us. We sent intention. We didn't tell the scientists which ones we were doing. They planted the seeds. They measured them 5 days later, and it turned out, when we finally unblinded the study, that the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. But let's just unpack this for a second. So I'm in Sydney, Australia with my audience of 700. The seeds are sitting in Tucson, Arizona, 8,000 miles away. And we're not sending intention to the thing, the seeds. We're sending intention to a photograph of the thing. You know, it's photographic representation. Nevertheless, it's having this major effect. And we ran it 5 more times, including at a Reconnective Healing conference. And every single time the seed sent intention grew higher than the controls. So that tends to invalidate the idea that, you know, we have that space is finite, that we have no control and no effect over space. But also, we don't have an effect over time. New studies, I mean, there's loads of studies showing that people had a presentiment about the Titanic, and there were an amazing number of cancellations before, you know, unusual number of cancellations before the trip launched, because people had a funny feeling about the trip. And there were more recent studies done by people like Dean Radin of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, testing psychological studies with multiple steps to them and finding, and here's the really weird one, that people, when you carried out the second task that you were asked to do, that influenced how fast you carried out the first task. So in other words, the future affected the past, or the future affected the present as it was unfolding. So there's a huge body of that kind of weird, out of time experiments that have been validated over and over again. And they start making us feel like, wait a minute, our notions of time, space, and causality are very different. Now, you guys have been experiencing that with healing over space, right?
You know, one of the most well-known characteristics of this approach and the interaction with this intelligence and the frequencies is that distance no longer becomes a measurement. One of the earliest studies done in terms of the frequency impact that really puzzled the researchers was the further away you moved from the interaction, the stronger the interaction became. And really, you know, for those who might not know, Reconnective Healing is primarily a hands-off the body approach. additionally, our students have been learning holographic reconnective healing for the last 5 years, maybe longer. And all of this starts to make beautiful sense, especially when you are able to observe, tangibly observe, that distance has disappeared. It truly isn't any longer a mathematical measurement. And so what does that mean on a philosophical standpoint? If there is no such thing as distance, meaning as a measurement, which is so much how we measure space, time, then you really are sort of in a position to look at the dynamic, the interchange, the engagement from an entirely different perspective. And what we explain is, like most things that are knowledge and science, you're taking many little pieces, bringing them together to create an understanding, right? This is the enlightenment theme. With this, in this process, reconnective healing, we have to start from where it lives, which is it lives in this whole space, nowhere. It is tangible, it is engageable, but the moment we start to engage with it, we're actually working in reverse. We're now transducing. It's becoming actually maybe what is comprehensible in the way that you talked about, the way the brain centers can understand in interaction, in embodiment, but that's not where it lives. So again, space-time, the disappearance of distance, these principles, I think, are principles that we've been trying to wrap our head around for a very long time.
So let's look at it this way a little bit. First of all, how does distance disappear? Well, when you increase distance, it appears to expand. There's more distance and more distance and more distance, so how has it suddenly disappeared? Because the factor is no longer there. We are viewing this as linear. If there's less, there's more. If there's tall, there's short. If there's wide, there's narrow. Now, the very first way that people are introduced to reconnective healing today, the very first way that they begin it is through actually an online program called The Portal. Now, why do we call it The Portal? Because how I was introduced to reconnective healing was through an opening. I held my hands near one of my patients, and when I was still functioning as a chiropractor, and I was aware, at a consciousness, that what was going on is the reunification of humanity to physical with humanity to spiritual. And as I brought my hands near my patient, I began to feel a sensation. And I moved my hand around that sensation in a way of exploring it. And suddenly something opened. Call it a doorway, call it a gateway, call it an entryway, or call it a portal, which has a little bit of a woo-woo sound, which I didn't intend to use, but it was that. And something began to communicate through this opening. The opening allowed for an immediate connection and communication with something that was dimensions away, but was suddenly present. Something that was time away, but suddenly present. And through this opening came a communication that allowed us to move beyond the energy that's been here in our four-dimensional existence into what later on the researchers described as new aspects of light and information, expanding this energy field. And somehow in the healing world, you watch people, they want to work closely, they want to move 3 inches off the body, or they want to touch the body, and all this is fear of a separation, fear of a disconnection. And when we allow ourselves to open up, we leave fear, we enter into a state of consciousness of love that allows us to recognize that although it may seem on one level that nothing and no one is touching, we realize that simultaneously everything and everyone is touching. And this is the expansion of love and the disappearance of distance, and ultimately requiring us to view the concepts of time and space very, very differently. But I believe it's this portal, is this entryway that is part of what's allowing us to make this connection.
I always say if there's one thing our students walk away with, there's a takeaway. It's that they absolutely know that they have touched the place where they are able to see themselves in another, and another is able to see themselves in them. It is the number one takeaway that they get, whether they become healers or they go on to practice or they ever do anything with Reconnective Healing again. They have unquestionably had that experience in an undeniable scientific way. So
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the thing. When you talk about, mindlessness and getting away, or awareness, just pure awareness, I think that is an interesting part of these new healing modalities. Even though they have certain differences, what I think is extraordinary is the stepping out of that place of the small me and the separation and the sense of time, which we essentially create. We create time and space. Us with our conscious, logical minds create time as an arrow. But even, major physicists now in more standard universities and more standard methods of research are saying, no, time as we know it does not exist. And we definitely notice this in our Power of Eight groups. We notice that people, first of all, step into a space of oneness. And in a way, they really feel it because they are part of this group. They feel that suddenly they step out of that sense of individuality. And it probably has some very ancient, it calls to a very ancient need of the human being, which is to belong. In my book, The Bond, I write a lot about how we never were meant to be separate and competitive. The book was really an answer to Darwin. And I looked at belonging. And I came to the conclusion that instead of being competitive, we were meant to share, care, and be fair. And sharing, belonging is more important to the human experience than food. I mean, the worst thing you can do to somebody is to ostracize them, as many societies understand. And people, even suicides, they found over and over again, they kill themselves because they don't fit in. They feel left out. So the connection people feel in my groups, I guess, is transcendent.
Yes.
That creates a kind of transcendent state because it's the way we were always supposed to be. When you look at all the research about belonging, it saves us from strokes, from even the common cold, depression. People who are part of a group are less likely to be depressed. They're less likely to be ill in any way. And what I do notice, and my groups say over and over again, my Power of Eight groups, I put them together in a once-a-year masterclass where people come together in groups for an entire year, and they get taught by me, and then they experience this process week by week by week. And I was just listening to somebody last week who was talking about it's her favorite part of the week because everybody shows up in total honesty, and they don't normally get that. And it's all about somebody being their witness, somebody having their back, but also this feeling of being part of a greater whole. We don't get to do that often. We don't get to do for others that often in that pure and selfless way. And I'm sure that's a lot about what the Reconnective Healing does too. It heals in a selfless way without even an attachment to outcome. And when we get into that space, certainly I've noticed it with the Power of Eight groups, we get into that space of altruism, of healing, not just me and this group, but you. It is incredibly healing. It's incredibly transcendent. It moves us beyond the small self essentially into the field, into that state of oneness.
You said it's the way we were meant to be. And it's really interesting. I'm hearing that so much in kind of everyday mainstream. I think we would articulate it a little bit differently. We would say it's actually the way you are. It's where you are. That's that awareness versus that mind awareness. But I am in the observation of so much that's happening in our world, this beautiful intention experiment you just did a day or two ago, 2 countries, two significant, different and same human beings coming together, in peace, all these things that we're wanting. I think that the awareness, that state where we exist already, is actually pulling the field. It is now reached a critical, I'm going to say, resonance, where our organic body, which is matter, energy, is no longer comfortable living in what we'll call that separate self, that me. It isn't responding, even as a body of biology. It isn't comfortable. And we've had the fortune of being able to go to Egypt. I mean, you can stand literally and look at the hieroglyphics where time as a concept, as a mind concept, was created. So we know we've overthunk ourselves right into what is not our actual self. It isn't our essential self. And all these beautiful practices that great colleagues of ours are doing, you and Greg and Joe and us, I think this is this moment in humanity where people are willing to listen from a different part of themselves, and it is waking them up. Everyone is having an anomaly moment. It isn't any longer you're a special person because you have encountered an anomaly. An anomaly is starting to become every person.
Absolutely.
Super.
Absolutely. And, maybe we should give people who haven't had this experience from either of our sides a little definition of what the field is. By field, what we mean is actually a field that has been measured scientifically, that scientists have known about since the development of quantum physics. They realize that quantum particles exchange information at every moment, and that exchange gives rise to a giant quantum energy field. And they've also recognized that everything in the universe, including human beings, at our nethermost level, have subatomic particles that interact with this field too. So we are, a lot of people talk about, you've got to enter the field. No, we are the field. We're in the field. We just don't know it, and some of these practices like Reconnective Healing, like the Power of 8 groups that I'm doing, are waking people up to the idea that we are this entity that is a collection of subatomic particles having a conversation with every other subatomic particle in the world. And that gives rise to a load of other things. There are a couple of big implications here. The first is that, the field is essentially a shadow world. It's a mothership of information, of all the information that ever was, contained in these subatomic particles, which have an infinite capacity to store information. But also, because particles are also waves and they go on forever, essentially and theoretically, we have the ability to access information at any point in this field, through all space and through all time. So the idea that we are these lonely little individuals on a lonely planet in a lonely universe, just stuck into our own little time-space suit, is totally fallacious. And it's why we're starting to see extraordinary things going on as people like you, Eric and Jillian, and the work that I'm doing, the work that Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden, et cetera, are doing. We are opening up people to their latent human capacity, which is far grander than we've been told.
So excited.
And part of what you're saying when we speak about being these subatomic particles reminds me of, what Nelson Harriman, among others, speak of, which is that every time we learn something, every time we explore something, every time there's an awareness expansion within us that's shared within one, even just one little particle, be it a proton, a neutron, an electron, and every time it's shared within one proton within us, it's shared within one proton, and every proton within our bodies and every proton in the universe. So our expansion is the expansion of the universe itself. And we think sometimes, am I too curious? Am I asking too many questions? But it's the overall bigger design of the universe for us to grow, which is why we have these conversations. It's why people listen and join in to explore these conversations. And what we've been discovering with Reconnective Healing is that the Reconnective Healing frequencies, the field of the Reconnective Healing frequencies has been expanding. And is it expanding because it's expanding? Has it been expanding because it's evolving, or has it been waiting for us to evolve? And what is the interaction within there? Because we know there's a change from where this came in. There's a change from where this came in when these frequencies introduce themselves. And there's a change in my awareness, but which is the chicken and which is the egg? You know, when Reconnective Healing first started, I was fascinated with and taken by and focused on the physical healings. And I thought it was about the physical. And I saw people's arms and legs changing and tumors disappearing, and I thought that was it. And it took quite a while for me to realize that the healings went beyond just physical. It went beyond our little pat phrases of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And it was transforming and affecting people's lives in many, 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 many ways. And I didn't realize yet how it was transforming my life and my awareness. And I realized that when this came about, it was so huge. For example, I told people it caught me by surprise. I didn't intend to be a healing. And, you know, as they say, mea culpa, I realized that that wasn't exactly even the truth that I was speaking. I knew that somewhere inside of me all along, and I believe this for most of us, we have been asking, how can we help others? How can we facilitate healings, whether it's in our presence, our love, our sharing, or our design to actually facilitate a healing through techniques or through non-techniques? And in that discovery, we find out, as you said, it is altruistic and it's not altruistic, because within facilitating healings for others, we are also, and we know this on a vibrational level, allowing ourselves to step into our own transformation and our own healing, which is part of how we find that in Reconnective Healing, the ultimate is to move beyond the concept of many techniques that teach that we need to just send a healing, but to also understand there's a bigger picture to that. And that bigger picture can be in our own receiving, because in our own receiving, we become transformed. And in our own transformation, since we are part of the field, then we transform the field, which allows for other people to receive. So sending and receiving becomes infinite in itself, even if we focus on one, even if we focus on the other, and even if we allow ourselves that maybe we're simply all here to receive, because that is also how we give.
Well, I think that's such an interesting idea, Eric, is that whole thing. And I mean, it certainly has paralleled a lot of the experience I have with Power of 8 groups, because, as I say, in my masterclass, I put people into groups for a year. And after the training, the initial 6 weeks of training, we then have them meet every week. And most people start having transformations in their lives pretty quickly. You know, their intractable illnesses start healing. But as you say, things beyond that, other things in their lives begin to heal. They get fantastic new jobs. They have successful new startups. They get the dream house they've always wanted. The money comes out of nowhere that just when they needed it, they rediscover or discover a new life's purpose. Their relationships are improved. You know, everything's starting to heal. One of the guys in one of my groups a year ago, his trainer said to him, "Man, I don't know what you're doing, but you've lost weight and you're building muscle mass and you're only training once a week. Could you share your secrets with me? And that, on top of the idea that he cured his lifelong depression, he managed to overcome writer's block. His Qigong practice got better. His practice got better. He's a psychologist. Everything started to heal. But there's something really interesting to me about the people when it doesn't work. You know, and what I've done after a while, I was working with them, I was trying to do this with them and that with them, and I finally would say to most of them, get off of yourself. You know, just stop intending for yourself and having the group intend for you. Intend for someone else. And we did that once with a woman called Andy, who was trying to get a new job, and she was trying her best with everything. She was a very talented marketing person and coach, couldn't get a job no matter how many applications. And she, you know, had a really good resume. So I finally just said, Andy, get off of yourself. Start intending for this young boy who tried to commit suicide. So she did. And I mean, just a few days after she did, out of nowhere, she gets a call with her dream job. That happened with other people. A woman I know who was in one of the other masterclass groups who was trying to write a book. She's a bodywork practitioner. She was getting nowhere. They were trying to intention for everything, and she's just not getting anywhere. I just please say, get off of yourself. So she did. She started intending for someone in the group who had really serious financial issues. And the next week, I swear to you, she gets this uncontrollable urge to go into a store. She doesn't even need anything in the store. Out of the blue comes somebody that she vaguely recognizes. They start having a chat. Turns out the woman not only is somebody that she had met once, but turns out to be an ex-publisher and now a book coach who offers to coach Lisa through her entire process because she was getting nowhere, help her with the marketing. Upshot is she publishes her book and it becomes an Amazon bestseller. So that kind of thing happened over and over and over and over again, to the point where I started recognizing that such a key piece, as you talked about, is getting off of yourself, of altruism. You know, there's so much science about the power of altruism. It activates a nervous system complex called the vagus nerve that refreshes your immune system. It also does something else that's so interesting in my intention experiments, like the one we did Monday, and how we were able to have Israelis and Jews on the same intention together with audiences of both there working together. It also activates something in the body that makes you more tolerant of people not like you. So that power of an altruistic act, in this case, an intention experiment, just activates your ability to step over, let the heart leap across the fence. So I think there's such power in altruism because it really does, you know, we're so focused on self-help, self, me. And once we step out of that into a bigger state, we not only, you know, we experience how life is supposed to be lived, and then we start accessing the stuff we really have, the power we really have.
So you had mentioned something, which was an interesting statement. What if the healing doesn't work? And then you looked at what if it didn't work, and then you told them how to shift their attention. But you know what? Let's take another perspective at what if the healing doesn't work. Usually when we say what if the healing doesn't work, what we're really saying is, what if we don't get the results that we want? What if we don't get the results for ourselves that we want? What if we don't get the results for the other person that we want? Maybe that's not the healing not working. Maybe that's the healing working perfectly and beautifully, but it knows more than we do with our limited, conscious, human intended mind that says, I want this healing, I want that healing, I want the other healing. Maybe sometimes we have to say, let's step in with the concept, the intention, the attention of allowing for a healing, and then seeing how the intelligence of the field or the frequencies orchestrates the perfect healing. Maybe the healing we're thinking that we want is to regain the use of our hands. Maybe the healing that actually needs to come about is a progress in life that allows for a change in career or a relationship. Maybe when we think the healing doesn't work, it's our indicator to step back 3 meters or 3 yards and say, wait a minute, let me see a bigger picture here. Maybe there had been the perfect healing, and it was me being so myopically focused on a specific result that didn't allow myself to see the picture. I remember when the first person came back to me in my practice and said, I didn't receive a healing. I didn't have a healing from the Reconnective Healing session you gave me. Nothing changed. But the weirdest thing is going on. Everyone at my office who has always been throwing up roadblocks for years for everything I do have suddenly become so friendly and supportive. I wonder what happened to them. Sometimes it's where we look.
Yeah, I really do have to agree with that. It's so interesting, again, in my master classes, because I'm monitoring people month by month by month to see not only in their health, but their relationships, their career, their life's purpose, what's going on. And we see big transformations. I mean, of course, with intention, we are sending out a specific request. And unlike a non-directed healing, we are saying, hey, universe, this is what I'd like. And unlike a prayer, we're saying, hey, universe, this is what we like, rather than thy will be done. Definitely. However, it's so interesting to observe that sometimes big changes in healings and transformations come about either through the back door in a way you never intended, or something else happens, as you say, that opens up the door to something bigger and greater. But one thing we can say is things shift.
Something's always happening. That's a really important part. Something is always happening. And I think that is a big part of the evolution in how we perceive healing now. I'm so grateful that just our understanding is expanding. And I think there is a lot of recognition. You know, my sister is Jamie Lerner. She's a well-being therapist, and she always talks in the conversation of options. And when we create these options for ourselves, and I think for many, the idea of creating an intention is the first awareness to actually having options in our life. That's, as you spoke about before, how boxed in space and time, this acknowledgement that we are 9 to 5, or we are, 12 to 12, these themes have created a paradigm in our brain to be so obedient, to be so clear. So, there's a lot of ways right now that we begin to unravel our potential. Where is the power of 8? Where is the power of now? Where is our eternal power? And my feeling is humanity has all these options. And these options present, I think, a lot of productivity in different times in our life. A new mother juggling a first-time baby where everything she's always known about giving and receiving and time and space, that's an entry moment. That's a moment where looking at the intention and understanding that is very important, because you know what? Relying on what you have to know is critical, and not know. At some points in our life, we reach a time where we, no matter how hard we've tried, we haven't been able to come up with the intention that's got us there. Sometimes that's the point of surrender. Often in that surrender moment, for us, this intelligence just consumes that individual because they're out of their mind already. Out of their mind. Yes. They're mindless already. So
yes. And I guess that's, I guess mine has the parallel in getting off of yourself and starting to intend for someone else. And just getting out of that obsessive thing about, I have to get this for me. And what ends up happening is they do when they get off of things. But another thing that's really interesting to me, and that kind of speaks to some of the things that have occurred with you guys over distances, we've been playing around a lot with time. And I've been asking people, I do this in the master class, I have people do retro intention. And so they go back and we do exercises where they take something that has essentially been a seed moment that defined their life in some way. So maybe it was the very beginning of a health issue that has really defined their lives, that blew into full-blown disease. Or an experience with a teacher where the teacher said they were stupid in math and they have decided they were stupid in math for the rest of their lives. Or they got hit by a parent or bullied or in some way belittled by a parent that has really affected them. So we don't go back to change what happened. What we go back to is to change their frame of mind about it. They go back and essentially replay it, but have a different thought about it. And it's really fascinating to me we've had some amazing breakthroughs with people.
We have a visitor.
Oh, hello, doggy.
This is Ruth.
Hello. Who is this?
This is Ruthie.
Ruth wants to
Ruthie. Hi,
Oh,
Ruthie.
not letting her out yet.
Ruthie wants to try a retro intention. I can see. Maybe she was abused as a puppy.
She was.
She's interested. Okay. So it's fascinating to me how it works, because it works. There are some major breakthroughs. She really does want this. And it just goes back to this whole idea. We're not trying to change the past. We're changing that person's psychic blueprint about the past, or the imprint about the past. And I mean, we have found so much about a psychic internet that happens across space, when lots of people separately are intending together for our intention experiments or for those seed experiments, for instance. But we've also found this as a time thing too, where there is a psychic connection over time that can be overcome. And this again speaks to that whole thing of we're so much bigger and we have so much more capacity than we've been told.
I'm so glad that you're touching on this theme beyond the neuroscience, because obviously the neuroscience really shows us that we can capture an instant moment and create an identity so strong that every chemical in our brain will literally shape the environment, the stasis of that identity. And releasing that or becoming our future self is something that I know a lot of the neuroscientists are excited about, and I think there's immense value. But you're talking about it from a very expanded perspective, and I love this concept of projection. These are the altered state experiences, and I'm excited that you're playing with this with your group, because there is so much that we are yet to reveal. I mean, first we always start with the mind, because that's what we have control over. You're really speaking to something much greater than that. You're saying there was a time-space moment, parallel perhaps, that this moment happened, this past experience happened, and through your ability to be able to disappear the distance, the past, you are able to just project a future in one second. I think that's what you're saying.
No, absolutely. And I mean, we are also playing around with future intention too. In other words, not just I intend for next week, but I'm projecting myself into the future and making that blueprint. Really what I'm talking about is an energetic blueprint. And I can talk about my husband, Brian Hubbard, wrote a book called The Untrue Story of You. And this book really talked about how we're not a self. We are a collection of selves. And one of the biggest bullies of the self is the past. And the past essentially creates us. Those past experiences that impacted us or we didn't understand, they created the self we think of as us. And, whether we think we were stupid at math because some teacher bullied us when we were a kid or whatever it is, that defines us. That becomes the you. So as he puts it, the thought thinks the thinker. And so what we're really doing is basically changing assuming that that energetic footprint is what is existing as the self. We are changing that with a thought, and that we're changing that leftover, that phantom. So that's what we're playing around with. But that is, as you say, beyond what neuroscience is talking about, even expanded neuroscience, because they're talking about this continuous self. And they're also talking about, in most cases, a continuum of time. But a self, neuroscientists define as, being locked inside our skulls. And we are now recognizing that, we don't think everything in our brains. Our brains are much more of a receiving mechanism and a transmitter than the repository of all information, including memory. And so once again, that's one more idea about how expanded we are and how we have so much more potential than we understand. And that we are now seeing this from, say, your work.
As you stepped into first looking through research and studying and your first book, The Field, which is how I came to know you, and then you moved into even going past your fears, let's say, in a sense, and stepping into the power of 8 and making discoveries and sharing the discoveries. It's really the recognition that where neuroscience or anything in science has brought us today is further than yesterday, but not as far as tomorrow. And it's our willingness. This is what allowed Reconnective Healing to appear here and be so powerful. Also, it's our willingness to choose our knowingness over and above and beyond just the point that science has come up to today. Because science knows things today it didn't know yesterday. It knows things today that it knew yesterday, and today we find out they're wrong. Tomorrow we find out they're right again. But our knowingness is our truth that allows us to recognize and explore. This is how I began to teach Reconnective Healing. I never thought it was teachable until I was thrust into something where I found that I could share these frequencies. Jillian and I can show people how to do this, and they can facilitate Reconnective Healing at a level that we can and beyond. We were just working with Jillian's nephew, Tucker's how old?
12.
12 years old, and his focus, and he grasped it, and he found it. We've worked with children 6, 7 years old, and they can grasp it, and they can grasp it better, oftentimes, than the adults, because the adults come in with their preconceptions, their shoulds, their shouldn'ts, their rights, their wrongs, the superstitions we've been taught, the limitations that have been put on us subliminally, and the children free themselves of that. And, we go around thinking that children are here as empty vessels that we should fill with everything that we know, instead of recognizing that maybe the children are here as empty vessels for us to rediscover how to become empty vessels once again. And this, I think, is what allows us to step into new levels of expansion, of healing, of evolution, of consciousness, and of being able to share this with the world.
And that's so right. And really what I'm gathering from you too is that we're getting back to, through some of the new science, we are having to go beyond to get back to who we really were and who we really are. And in discovering how to access some of this, you're bringing the future, but also the past together with people to get beyond awareness, as you say, because indigenous populations understand something about this. They understand our extended human potential. When I was trying to find an antecedent for the power of 8, because I figured to myself, I discovered it by accident. People put people in a group, they started getting healed. I looked and looked. I said, somebody else must have thought of this before me. And I found actually that in the Bible, there's mistranslation of an area of the Acts where Jesus is telling his apostles how to pray. And he tells them to pray. The King James Version says pray with one accord. But